That was started. If we started recording, yes. Good, we're recording. Good stuff. So I'll go back to that and okay. So really, it is entirely about your design. So you've got the design of Magneto here from the sort of PlayStation Lego games, and then of course you've got my sort of design that was gifted to me by a student that's my little bobbing head doll. And if I don't want anyone to agree with me, I say, "What do you think, Magneto? Is it a yay or a nay?" And he nods his head in agreement every single time, which is lovely. The stormtrooper is not so great at agreeing. His head sort of, goes from side to side. So he's very, very ambiguous. And if I want a sort of conflicting opinion, I go to him. So all these things are on my desk. Good stuff. So we're going to talk about what purpose does a game design document serve? What is a good games design document? What is a games design document? And what should it really consist of for the purposes of this module? Now, I've given you quite a lot of examples that are of sort of commercial quality, I suppose. So you've got Silent Hill 2, you've seen the one for Doom as well, and Grand Theft Auto as well. So really these things can be as much detail as you wish, and it's really your overall vision of the game. It is supposed to be a living, breathing document that really a team is supposed to work on and a team is supposed to develop. But because this is going to be either individual or a maximum group of two, obviously that's not going to be the case, but it's just to sort of introduce you to them. So for the computer animation arts students and for the computer games development students as well, it's really about using your imagination and having a lot of fun with it, I would say, and coming up with a game that you would actually like to see in existence. So story, characters, objects, influences, level, environment design, art, sound, and music, and of course some sort of user interface and game controls. Now, this is possibly a little bit too high level. It is a relatively sort of antiquated reference, the games design template from 2006, but it is a reference nonetheless. I realize it could possibly update these things, and the reason that I've included it there is because there's a template at the end of this presentation, and it is quite large or quite vast or quite detailed. That's really what I'm sort of going for. So, according to Kramelczewski and Dinucci, 2018, in their book Practical Game Design, the purpose is it's providing the team with a detailed description of what needs to be done. So it's really about communication. And it acts like a sort of encyclopedia of the game. And as you can see from looking at these sort of commercial quality ones, encapsulates or encompasses absolutely everything that is associated with the game, all the artwork, in order to keep track of absolutely everything that has been done, and what has changed as well. So it's a sort of living, breathing document. Guidelines, it should be modular. Now, obviously, when we're sort of doing this, we're putting it into sort of modular structured form. And that's fine. So we've broken it into various different things, the game objects, the user interface, the stories, the levels, the influences, the competition, that sort of thing. That's fair enough. Has goals and requirements. Not necessarily in this particular case, I would say. And it sort of depends how you view it, because there are games design documents and there are technical design documents as well. And technical design documents really sort of go into all the requirements, the functional, the non-functional requirements, that sort of thing, with a certain level of specificity. Now, it depends who you actually speak to. These are all perhaps seen as one and the same, or the technical design document is in fact part of the games design document. Really depends on who you speak to. And if I sort of remember at the end, I'll show you a diagram of how people sort of think it all fits in. But for the purposes of this course, we're going to go for a games design document, which is sort of less technical, and we'll possibly encounter technical design documents later. It's the result of a discussion. I realise this could be an individual sort of coursework, but if you visualise people sort of working in a team, it is the result of a discussion, and people have communicated exactly what they're sort of wanting to see in the game. It's supposed to be clear, brief and concise, is multimedia as well, and of course it leaves space for creativity and debate, and comes in various different formats and sizes. Generally nowadays, because of cloud computing and all that kind of stuff, it can be online as well. For you guys, I'm just happy with a Word document. I've provided the template. All you really need to do is fill all of that in, and that's absolutely fine. And so what sort of level of detail is sort of entirely up to you. Excuse me, having a bad throat day. Anyway, so yeah, if you have a sort of draft of your game design document, then send it my way, and I'm quite happy to sort of look at it. In terms of the courseworks and stuff like that, which we'll sort of bring out next week after you've sort of had some time to digest it. At university, generally, if you're sort of wanting or you're expecting or the academic expects you to sort of write 2,000 words, try to write 2,000 words. Try to sort of not give any form of excuse to deduct marks, if that makes sense. So yeah, if you're to write 1,000 words or 2,000 words, depending on the option that you're going for, then try to aim for that. Now, obviously, if you're going to be marking a whole load of games design documents and someone has put a phenomenal amount of effort onto it and, you know, bang right on the kisser of the 2,000 words, and some people have perhaps, you know, only written 1,500 words, then obviously there has to be some equity and equality in there, in the marking scheme, if that makes sense. So, modular. In relation to modular programming, this is where the functionality is sort of broken into independent, interchangeable modules, containing everything necessary to execute one desired piece of functionality. That's only for the sort of games development people. So remember that these things have to be, you know, broken down into the small components, and you have to be able to sort of locate these things and index them and that sort of thing. Remember that a AAA game, this document can be 1,000 pages long, can be incredibly large. Particularly nowadays, some of those sort of games design documents that I showed you before, one of them is, I believe, about 72 pages long, but those were, you know, years ago. And what you sort of have is possibly, you know, a team of 150 people working on a game. So every time you refer to a piece of functionality, then you point to it in the document, or at least that's the plan. Does that actually sort of work out that way? Not entirely certain. So yes, there's Lord Raiden there. Not entirely sure why in the name of God I've actually put him in there, but yes, he seems to be there. When you think of a AAA game like this, the games design document must be immense, I would imagine, or would hope it would be rather immense. Someone got a question? Or is someone clicking away? I just hear clicking. I thought someone was trying to get my attention. Never mind. Okay, so goals and requirements. Offers a single player experience. Oh, right, okay. Oh, right, I see what's sort of happened here. I've put Mortal Kombat 11 in there, or put Lord Raiden in there to sort of illustrate a point. So the goals and requirements are to pay homage to what the game has in fact been in the past. So if you think of a AAA game or a sort of franchise, or a series like Mortal Kombat, then you've got to sort of pay homage. You've got to keep your original sort of target players, of course, and keep them happy. But yet at the same time, you're always trying to expand the storyline. You're trying to expand the fan base, but keep the existing fan base, if that makes sense. So that was a bit of a sort of point there that I sort of had. So offers a single player experience to the Mortal Kombat players. introduces new characters and levels. It keeps the base fans interested as well, and of course tries to expand the storytelling facility. Now, obviously, in their infancy, beat 'em up games and things like that or fighting games were reasonable stories, but now they've expanded beyond belief, and everyone sort of has a story mode in order to sort of keep people that like complicated stories and narrative happy. And they also just have the sort of beat 'em up sort of mode that's got a limited story. Requirements, you've got to try and keep the game accessible. So you're trying to stop avoiding too many mechanics while you're at the same time having the balance of sort of versatile system. So keeping old characters in balance with new ones. And what we sort of mean by that is sometimes they add in new characters. I remember there was a Fuchun, was he the god of wind or something? And he was supposed to be like Raiden's brother, and no one liked him, and he was a terrible character, and basically the balance was off. And sometimes that does happen in sort of fighting games and games in general. But I can only sort of think of examples from fighting games where you think to yourself, that's a good character because his moves are easy, they flow together well, and everything is hunky-dory. And then you get others, like if you consider the original sort of Street Fighter 2, one of the fireballs is down to toward and high punch, and that's great. But then when you consider actually doing a fire or Guile's sonic boom, you've got to hold backwards for 2 seconds, then pull forwards, and then do a high punch. And that becomes quite unfair because there's a bit of a timing element associated with it. So these things can be a bit unbalanced, so to speak. And then, of course, we've got to adhere to the story telling setting guidelines as well. So in order to sort of pay homage, Mortal Kombat, I don't know if you actually seen Shang Tsung's fatality for this particular game. It was quite horrid, to be honest. And you're going, I think I counted like 3 livers there. So basically, they're suspended up there, and then these horrible demons come up and they rip out their innards, and it's lovely. But yet at the same time, you're going, I don't think a human body composes of 55 kidneys. But anyway, there you go. So it's trying to pay homage to that while adding new things. Can be the results of a discussion. So this is a bit of a confrontation. You have to stay open to criticism. No ideas are too crazy. Now, this is what I'm talking about. If a game team sort of get together, you're allowed to sort of talk about all of these things. No idea is too out there. It's just called, I think it was called brainstorming, although I don't necessarily think you're allowed to say that anymore. So when you do hear other people's ideas, nowadays when you're in a team, you're supposed to be quite kind and not be overly critical and don't say, oh, for God's sake, that's a terrible idea. And only when ideas have actually survived a little bit of constructive criticism is it clear what to write. And obviously you guys are just coming up with a game yourself. You're not really going to be open to a great deal of criticism, apart from my criticism, if it can be called that. And that's only sort of academic criticism. Your ideas probably won't particularly form much of an opinion on that, because I did sort of leave it open to you. But one thing to remember is that at university, you will experience a fair amount of constructive criticism. And there are sort of 2 ways to deal with this. Number 1 is to sort of take it on the chin and sort of reflect and say, oh, I wonder how I'm going to improve and move on from it. And that's fine. That's what growth is all about. The other sort of way is just to, never expose yourself to criticism again, which really isn't quite realistic. I have no self-confidence whatsoever. Anyone that's ever done a PhD has no self-confidence, because essentially you're supposed to obsessively work on something for 4 years, then have it shot to bits, and then you're supposed to try and defend it. And by the time you come out of all of that, you're going, I didn't think I was going to make it. And I'm glad I did, but you're able to take constructive criticism without taking it personally, I might add. That's the sort of main thing. So you've got to look at these things rather objectively. What is this all about? So I've got a picture of, yes, there's the, I suppose, various sort of different things. It's got to sort of pay homage. I know there was a sort of series of Norman Bates, and that sort of had this sort of pay homage to the original sort of movies as well. And there's the sort of Halloween episode of The Simpsons. Now, I do believe that the reason I put this in here is to give you a sort of example of story. And I don't know if you remember this, but the story has got to be, it's suspension of disbelief, really. And it's supposed to be sort of slightly believable. Yeah? And you'll hear Homer saying, and then his wife came through the door. And they go, so? Well, did I mention he was dead? No. All right. And then he got hit in the head with a golf club. You know, and it didn't really sort of particularly go together well. And so, you know, well, don't you remember he went golfing all the time? He really bugged. You said he went bowling. Oh, Homer, I've coughed up scarier stuff than that. So you've got to sort of get the story sort of flowing, and it's got to be believable, I would say. So it's got to have clarity and comprehension and covers all sorts of necessary details. You can have bullet points as well in the game's design document, and try not to sort of use weak statements, but these are really sort of associated with requirements. That's what I'm sort of talking about here. So I've gone into a little bit too much detail, if that makes sense. Can be multimedial as well. You sort of notice that these things are multimedial nowadays, where you've got your your sort of 3D characters as well. You've then got your two-dimensional sort of images and things like that, and then you've got your map as well there. So I don't know if you can sort of see this. So that's what it means by sort of multimedial as well. Okay. Let's see. Could I actually sort of do this? Oh, got a pen! Fantastic. So you've got your sort of map there. And by that I mean you can have a sort of map that represents a level in the game's design document. And of course, you can have the sort of 3D representation of this as well. Then you have all your objects. These, of course, can be 3D in the game environment, but then, of course, they can simply be 2D here. Okay, does that sort of make sense? And then, of course, you have your sort of levels as well, or the sort of little measurements that are relevant throughout the game too. Does that sort of make sense? Good stuff. So, a game team is comprised of many sort of talented individuals, and the idea is to convey intention rather than implementation. So the main thing to remember is don't necessarily sort of tell others how to do their jobs, if that makes sense. So there are a variety of different formats and sizes that you can use nowadays. Google Docs is relatively popular. Everything's sort of online. I would suggest that you just sort of, for the purposes of this exercise, you would just do a small Word document, and that's fine. If you're in a sort of group or whatever, which you will be at level 9 or 3rd year or whatever, then you could possibly put it in Google Docs. And have people sort of alter the file as they sort of go along. And that keeps track of everything, and multiple people can sort of alter it at sort of different times, if that makes sense. And that's the way we sort of do university reports, where I contribute to a certain section of it and other people contribute to the different sections of it as well, sort of simultaneously online, and there's a sort of cloud copy as well. But obviously, we're just wanting a sort of Word document. I've gone too far. Can be online. Do yourself a favor and make the most of incredible technology nowadays. I think I'm preaching to the choir here, baby. Now, I suppose that in the case of the computer animation arts students, I would imagine that a lot of you have sketchbooks and things like that. You're artists, perhaps. And you could possibly take, if you're sort of designing, and that's what I sort of mean by use your creativity here, you can sort of draw your characters. It doesn't necessarily have to be computerized, but you can also just take pictures of your sketchbooks if you have them or whatever. So even sketchbooks can be scanned, captured in digital format. Do it now and thank yourself for having done it in a few years' time. Backup is constantly important. I don't know if any of you have gone through the rather sort of horrific scenario of possibly, losing something forever. and I sort of have, and it was actually a book chapter, not necessarily that it couldn't be replaced, but I would have had to do it again, and that would just be horrible. So that's really from a sort of design game team perspective, if that makes sense. And here is what a games design document actually is. So it's the designer's entire vision spelled out in detail, which includes all of the storyline, character dialogue, world maps, city views, and detailed room specifications such as sample wallpaper, artwork, and rug designs. So that's going into an incredible amount of detail. It also includes audio content for background or ambient sound effects, character dialogue with accents and speech patterns, programming, and AI considerations. So that's one definition of a games design document. Okay. It's also called the Game Bible, and if something exists in the game, it should exist in the design document. Now, I have sort of looked at early literature on games design documents, and this was possibly before the days of sort of cloud computing and collaboration online. And they did say, which I thought was relatively amusing, to avoid confusion, burn the previous, but you will burn, you know. Who are you that would stand against me? I love Smaug. Yes. Now that is a pity. What will you do now, student? That's obviously Sauron in the middle. But anyway, when I heard burn, I thought, yes, gotta have him, played by the very talented Benedict Cumberbatch. And also, for you computer animation art students, if you get the extended version of The Hobbit and see how bloody long it took them to construct this dragon, wow. It's actually, it's almost like a documentary at the end of it. And I would say that anyone's actually doing a degree in computer animation arts, it's worth watching, just to see how they've gone about constructing this dragon. And I think, I don't know, I'm exaggerating here. It was like a month before the Hobbit was going to be released or something. They still hadn't agreed on this dragon. And you'll notice that he has a very, very sort of particular design. And that's quite awesome, to be honest, because his claws basically sort of become his wings. So I would certainly say that is totally worth it. So, you will burn. Is that your child? You have nothing left but your death. Anyway, I'll stop doing impressions now and just go on to the Wikipedia. Now, you shouldn't really quote Wikipedia if you're doing an honours dissertation or something like that, but we're obviously just we first years, and that's fine. So, Wikipedia defines a games design document as a highly descriptive living design document of the design for a video game. A games design document is created and edited by the development team and is primarily used in the video game industry to organize efforts within a development team. The document is created by the development team as a result of collaboration between their designers, artists, and programmers as a guiding vision, which is boring, is used throughout the game development process. When a game is commissioned by a game publisher to the development team, the document must be created by the development team and is often attached to the agreement between publisher and the developer has to adhere to the game's design document during game development process. Wow, so that's a lot. Don't use Wikipedia. I just sort of nicked that because I thought it was a relatively good definition of what a games design document was. I have more, of course. So, content can be text, images, diagrams, concept art, whatever you choose, or any applicable media to better illustrate sort of design decisions. So, important, considered a requirement by many companies that has no sort of set industry standard form. And I think if it does, if you actually go into a games company, they're relatively secretive about how these things are actually sort of manifested into real life, or what particular standards they have. So if they do have a sort of format for these things, they certainly don't publicize them. And you'll notice probably due to the sort of creative nature, it is quite, difficult to standardize them, if that makes sense. So for the purposes of this module, a template is provided on Aula. I hate saying that word. So what should it consist of for the purposes of this module? A story. So a story doesn't necessarily have to have a story, because if you consider things like Tetris, or it can be a simplified story. Okay, so story is a linearly ordered sequence of events set by a storyteller, whereas a game allows the player to have a choice of the sequence of events. So a play of a game can be told afterwards as a story, but a game cannot be constructed from a story alone. But let's face it, it is a bloody good start. Okay? So it puts the gamer in a position where they know what is going on and gives them a reason for why they have to do what they do. So it's an account of a series of events, and you sort of know what a story is. It just has to be sort of slightly believable and not like Homer's Halloween story from The Simpsons. Okay, so does that all sort of slightly make sense? We have had a number of movies we've had a number of movies that have been transformed into video games, and that sort of worked. What happens when you then transfer a video game into a movie? It becomes sort of slightly less successful, I've found, but you know, we'll talk about that at a sort of later date. So story can be a high level of abstraction. In a game, types of narrative can be used to divulge the details of the story. So there could be embedded and emergent narrative as well. So what I mean by that is that if you tackle a story from a particular level of abstraction, we've all seen The Avengers, I presume, in 2012, and it depends on the sort of level of abstraction, the level of detail. I mean, if it was a case of, would you pay to hear this version of the story? Loki comes to Earth with the Tesseract, the Avengers sort of get together, try and fight him, and he sort of beats them off, or at least what's his name? Mick Fury gets the Avengers together to try and fight him. He sort of wins initially, and then he doesn't, and sort of loses. And then steals the Tesseract and goes off into his own series. So yes, that's a sort of high level of abstraction of that story. Now you notice that a lot of detail has been missed out. Yeah, so that's the overarching high level version of the story. Yeah, and obviously the narrative is what exposes the details of everything in a video game anyway, and that can be through various different things. I mean, it can be through sort of textual interaction or embedded or emergent narrative, which you've all sort of seen. Some editions do sort of ruin the fluidity. And I sort of remember this. Was it Rogue One, the Star Wars story? I can't remember. I just remember this scene being Darth Vader's slaughter, right? And I thought it sort of ruined the fluidity, and you can disagree with me here if you like, of A New Hope, the start of A New Hope, because you actually sort of see him trying to get the Death Star plans. He sees the ship fly off, and he's sort of looking at it, and then it's almost like it's a surprise sort of inspection when he's talking to his daughter. You're part of a rebel alliance, a traitor, and my daughter. Take her away. You know, and you're going, didn't you sort of know that the Death Star plans were here? You just saw it fly off, you know. Feel free to disagree with me if you like. But anyway, some editions sort of ruin the fluidity. Another great sort of thing is that I've always had a difficulty with, and I'm sure you guys are probably the same, is that Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, because there's prequels and things that exist, Gandalf seems almost sort of slightly surprised that he finds the Ring of Power and, oh, Sauron has returned. You didn't battle him in the sort of previous trilogy, didn't you? And you weren't surprised. Sauron! You know, he sort of battled him when he thought he was the necromancer. Then all of a sudden it's a surprise. So that's what I sort of mean by additions ruin the fluidity, but it doesn't matter because they make money. Yep. Good stuff. So, here's a sort of story when you consider these things exist in a floating storyline, okay? A continuous sort of floating storyline. So when you consider things like The Simpsons and Family Guy and The Simpsons, if you watch the first season of it, it's incredibly simplistic. The characters are incredibly simplistic. And then, of course, it goes haywire because it becomes popular and it takes off. And what I sort of mean by a floating storyline is that it exists in a world where Bart is perpetually 10, Lisa is perpetually 8, forever, and it just sort of goes round main sort of events in history that sort of happen, yeah? And different sort of holidays and things like that. The Simpsons are going to Japan! And Family Guy is pretty much the same, although probably the sort of dirtier version of The Simpsons with more sort of adult humour. And you'll notice that the first season of Family Guy was relatively simplistic, and then all of a sudden sort of took off. Yeah. And this is a poster that I used to have in my office. And this is The Simpsons almost currently, at least some of the characters now. So it's evolved from that to this. And video games are more or less the same, or computer games becoming exceptionally complex as well. And it sort of depends on the amount of money that's funneled into them. And some of the characters have actually been killed off. In The Simpsons, Maud Flanders, for example, Dr. Marvin Monroe, the less popular characters seem to disappear. And that's the sort of power of the story. If you come up with a sort of original idea and actually make a phenomenal amount of money with these things, it's phenomenally powerful in a sense that you can actually more or less kill off characters. Look at Game of Thrones, my God. That was a sort of power. Okay. Did anyone sort of get the ending that they wanted to Game of Thrones? I'll just stop sharing so I can see your answers. You gave up watching it? Oh no! No one was a fan. Oh, dear God. Never watched it. Oh, for the love of God. You're the only person that got the ending well, sorry, an email went off and distracted me there. The only person in the world that got the ending that they wanted to Game of Thrones was me. I did, because I just wanted the dragon to be okay and massacre everyone, and that is exactly what happened. The only way I was slightly sort of disappointed was that they vilified Dany, and I thought she was such a good character up until that point. You know, her descent into madness was really rather swift. So that was the only part that I found disappointing. But I thought, I want that main dragon. I want that main dragon to be fine. Yeah, no, 1 out of 3 dragons isn't great though. That's fine. The other dragons were irrelevant. What was it? Viserion and Regal? No one cared. And it sort of, it was an ice dragon, wasn't it? It was a Deathwalker dragon. But as long as Drogon was fine, I was cool. And then when he massacred King's Landing, I'm going, oh yes, and he flies away with his mummy, and you're like, oh, wonderful. So I was the only person in existence that got the ending that they wanted to Game of Thrones. Great. And I could watch it time and time again. Even sort of listen to the last war. So that's the music that was sort of played to it. And I just visualize Drogon going round about the gym, killing everyone. Wonderful. Yes. So my point is, Game of Thrones decided to sort of shock everyone originally because initially because it was a case of, you know, anyone can die. That's cool. But these storylines have become so disgustingly complex that it doesn't really matter anymore. People can be killed off. Yep. So, Mortal Kombat. That's a sort of nice example of a video game. Originally, I think there were 6 characters in Mortal Kombat. This is obviously Mortal Kombat 2. But the story becomes far, far, far more complicated. So I've actually included this, and I'm not going to read it out again in the Owler side, but that's what sort of Christopher Lambert says in that 1995 movie. And that's him setting the scene, or you can set the scene to your game or your game design document by saying something like this. So to enter the realm of Earth, the Emperor's demon sorcerer Shang Tsung and his warriors have to win 10 straight victories in Mortal Kombat. They have won 9. And you go, oh God, that's not a good scenario to be in. But if it's sort of a hello, that's you know that was many quite a few years ago. So that's what the characters sort of look like in Mortal Kombat now. So from the original 6, you've got all these new ones, and it's great, and it sort of pays homage a little bit because I've always got Scorpion and Sub-Zero. Did anyone sort of see the new movie? And they sort of messed with the storyline a little bit there because I thought that Shao Kahn was the Emperor of that world, at least he was in Mortal Kombat Annihilation, and now it's Emperor Shang Tsung, and you're going, you're confusing me now. And the thing that I find quite interesting about all these Emperor Shang Tsung is sitting in Outworld and you're going, what do you people do in between tournaments? Because it doesn't look as if this place is particularly happening. Batman versus Superman. I quite liked it. There's a Batman staring at Superman. I don't know. He seems to be the view seems to be a bit too low for me there. So sometimes in terms of story, all you really need are two sort of monumental characters or whatever. If you consider things like The Dark Knight, you have three monumental characters. You get Batman, you get Heath Ledger, the Joker, and then you've got Harvey Two-Face that no one cares about. And these characters basically intermingle maybe 2 or 3 times in the story. And that's why video games are different. They are interactive and they're not linear. Yeah. Oh my God. I hadn't had a chance to sort of look through this lecture, but there we go. Game of Thrones, brilliant storyline. I got the ending I wanted. The dragon killed everyone. Woo! Took 8 seasons to watch it. And I sort of said to my mum, I said, you should watch Game of Thrones before you shuffle off the mortal coil. And she binge watched all of it. It was unbelievable. So anyway, here's more examples of story. Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening. He just sort of wakes up in an unknown island surrounded by friends and foes. So this is me sort of giving you a little example of how a story can sort of set the scene for everything. He must collect a number of objects, solve a variety of puzzles, and complete 8 dungeons to obtain the 8 instruments of the sirens in order to wake the windfish and complete the game. You can save the princess. As usual, Bowser always sort of, kidnaps Princess Peach at the beginning of a Mario game. Save me, Mario, save me. Oh no, it's okay, I will save you, little Princess Peach. And he sort of traverses all these levels in order to save his girlfriend. Cool. Could be kill zombies, whatever. There's Hungry Shark Evolution. So that's how to sort of talk about the story as well. So it should also consist of characters, protagonists, antagonists, supporting characters, perhaps minions as well. So obviously the protagonist is someone like Mario, the person that sort of contributes in the game, and then there's someone that sort of let's pick Zelda for example. So there's Ganondorf, and he always sort of kidnaps Princess Zelda or something like that, and then Link always has to go off and save her, that sort of thing. So you've got your protagonist, you've got your antagonist, and then you've got sort of supporting characters that are just along for the ride. These people can sort of, or these characters, NPCs through AI can sort of support you, give you little tips. If they're integrated into the game in a sort of structured sort of way, in a scaffolding capacity, it's actually quite fun, where you're going, what the bloody hell does that little fairy want now? Zzz, and it's sort of buzzing at you. Fair enough. Then you get minions and things like that. So you can have all of this in your game's design document. You can create your own characters. You can come up with or you can download these characters as well. So we've got enemies as well, or the different sort of game objects. So in Plants versus Zombies, and this is how these things are actually sort of implemented in a very sort of efficient way. So nowadays you'll get a patch, and then you get new functionality, and basically the sort of underlying object orientation and all the programming is there. All you're sort of doing is you're replacing those assets and adding a little bit of additional functionality. So there you got all your plants there. So you've got the sort of fire-breathing one, the dragon plant or whatever, and then you've got all your zombies as well. So you can have a sort of show reel like that. Yeah. Once again, here's another sort of example of all the characters as well. And this is a sort of example of how the design can be different. If you go into sort of Legoland or whatever, you can have all these characters again, but it's a different sort of style. Yeah. So there's I don't know quite know why Darth Vader and the Emperor are having a battle there. Die, Vader. Do what Darth Vader and Lord Vader. Do not hesitate. Show no mercy. Only then will you be strong enough with the dark side to save your little girlfriend that you don't really care about. So, different sort of approach. We all sort of know what Star Wars looks like. We've seen it on the sort of main games as well, whether it's actually very, very impressive or visually. And then, of course, you can have it with this sort of extra little design. So this is you sort of crossing ideas as well. Here are the objects, so that can be things like the components of the environment, whether that's a wall that you did sort of last week with the catch the clown thing, the background environment, the clown itself, I suppose, is really the main antagonist of that game. And who is the protagonist? I suppose the clown is as well, because you're attempting to catch him. But never mind, you've got all your objects there, so I've put a sort of picture of a Zelda game in there to show you all the sort of collectible objects and things that you have to sort of gather up in order to sort of complete your quest. And I do enjoy, as I'm sure everyone does, I do enjoy these sort of Zelda games where you've always got to, I don't know, go to the Temple of Doom and collect the Carpet of Fire before you can go to the next level, collect the Carpet of Hate. So there's some objects there, and there's a sort of, I think that's a Call of Duty game or something. I can't remember exactly where I got that, but there's a number of objects there as well. So you can have all of these things in your game's design document too, whether that's going to be weapons or collectibles, health, whatever. Doesn't necessarily matter. Presumably you've got some form of idea. So influences, what games is your game in fact based on? What characters are your games based on? Be quite honest about this, because I am relatively worldly wise. I have had third years in the past say to me, well, we were thinking of actually having a platformer game where they sort of traverse a number of levels and collect things, coins, and then fight some. Oh, it's Mario, isn't it? It's bloody Mario. Go through pipes. Yes, it's Mario. And then, be quite honest about these, because coming up with an original idea nowadays is quite difficult. Yeah. What's this? Last year, it wasn't last year, but a student came up with a sort of idea of having a genetically altered, half-dead hare going through a lab, killing people. And this is what the level design sort of looked like. So you've got a little bit of level design in this, and that is just beautifully illustrated, I thought. She had the sort of drawing here, yeah, sort of level design. I'm just drawing for no reason, and this is how it sort of eventually sort of transpired. Okay, so she just managed to sketch it all down, and that was fair enough. So essentially, it doesn't necessarily have to be, a sort of rigorous technical schematic done in Word. It can be whatever you feel comfortable producing, if that makes sense. So if you're a sketch artist or whatever, or you're just wanting to sort of sketch things down, then that's good enough. And then this is how the game sort of ended up. She's now gone, and she's no longer in the course. The game was bloody dreadful. I mean, that was really it. I mean, you sort of walked to the next room and you killed someone, and that was all she wrote, to be perfectly honest. But I did like the level design principles in there, because you cannot deny that level has just been brought into being next to that. Okay. So another sort of thing is how do you sort of then think of the level design? So this is a sort of different representation in Hungry Shark Evolution. Okay, so you've got the sort of idea of the shark sort of swimming along, but then when you pause that, you've got some form of map that gives you an idea of where to sort of go. Yeah. And then, of course, you've got the sort of plants versus zombies sort of thing here, where it's really sort of designed into a sort of grid, and all you do is drop plants and you sort of formulate your strategy that way. Okay, so how are you actually going to sort of design your level? So that's a level. Environments are, of course, slightly sort of different. So in Plants versus Zombies or whatever, you've got various different sort of themed worlds. Okay, so that's a sort of themed environment where you've got the Wild West or whatever. And in the sort of Mario games as well, you've got the sort of snowy level, the desert level. So these environments are sort of the worlds, I should say. There's normally a sort of environment theme that happens, and then the individual sort of levels are then spawned from that. Okay. Arcs, you can take things off the internet, providing that you acknowledge where you got them. You can get them from various different sort of locations, like Turbo Squid. I think there's a Turbo Squid 3D nowadays, and you can also draw your own if you're a sort of computer animations art person. This was a computer games technology person, I believe, and they decided to do their own drawing anyway. And why in the name of God anyone would come up with a half-dead hare, I will never know. It sounds very sort of Jeffrey Dahmer to me, dissecting roadkill, etc. Okay, so sound and music. You can have a theme tune for the overall game, pieces of music associated with particular characters. I've sort of showed you that. So the then I'll put that on the link as well. Zelda obviously has the sort of main theme tune. You know, and I've actually played the Ballad of the Windfish, so I'll put that up at some stage as well. And this can be anything that you sort of like. Well, the background music, these are associated with particular characters, perhaps. One of the worst leitmotifs that I've ever experienced is that one from Lady and the Tramp, where that lady dog makes an appearance, goes. Oh, hate that anyway. But there you have it. It's associated with a particular character. Okay, and you can use anything, providing that you can justify it. It's only university coursework, so don't think that you're infringing on copyright or anything like that. No one is going to see it but me. I seriously doubt that you're going to go away and sell it. I'm sure. Particular effects like jumping, shooting. Yeah, Mario sort of does that. It's quite interesting ones, because I remember sitting in the student staff liaison group meeting, and this person from music technology said, we've never been shown how to sort of use video or produce video game effects like firing. And you mean, are you kidding? You don't just go pew, 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 pew. Anyway, never mind. So due to the nature of sound effects, it would be nice to just have links to the particular sound effects within the game's design document. Yeah. User interface. These encompass menus, introduction screens, and of course the sort of control mechanism. So you can just have a picture of a keyboard and say, this is how my game is controlled. And that's absolutely fine. Or a picture of a controller and just say, when I press this, it will fire. When I press this, it will punch, whatever. And that's possibly a little bit sort of more relevant. But if you're going to implement a particular game, that's all fair enough. But if you're just sort of doing this as part of a game's design document, and that's going to be your sort of main choice, then just make sure that it's all sort of in there, because eventually I have to present these to the external examiner and I have to sort of say where I got my marks from, and that's me sort of being sort of fair, I suppose. Okay. Do graphical user interface design principles come into it? Of course, they can. We'll talk about these later, perhaps in the programming with objects module. So it's really a bit possibly more relevant to computer games design people or development people who are actually coming up with pieces of software. Now, I'm not entirely certain. You do have a lot of computer animation art students that end up working in the games industry and sometimes in the software industry. But graphical user interface design principles are sort of a thing as well. I'll talk about those a little bit more. I did in programming with objects. Now there's the worst piece of graphical user interface design there with these little beady eyes. And what would sort of happen was, if you were idle for any length of time, we would tap in the screen. And, you know, I think possibly it's before your time, but we all swore at him. So this is a template. I don't want you to actually necessarily fill out all of these things. This is just supposed to be provoking a little bit of thought. So this is the template with the reference that I sort of mentioned. And I would love to try and pronounce that name, although I fear I would get it wrong. Okay, section 1, overview. Design summary, key design aims, unique selling point list. Why is your game unique? You've always got to sort of do that in life. We had to put into the press release why our course was sort of unique. Game objectives. What is the player's key objective in the game? What is the goal? The goal is immensely important. Why should the player care about progressing? What kind of visual style are you going to go for? Is it going to be mirroring reality or what? Or is it you're trying to sort of create something sort of visually unique? So think about that. Target audience, we've sort of spoken about that as well. So you can use the PEGI. I forget exactly what that stands for. You can sort of use that in order to give it a certificate. Yes. So What kind of age group are you heading? Are you aiming for? That sort of thing. Is it hardcore gamers? Is it older gamers? Is it families? Whatever. Target platforms. You might want to actually state that. Is it going to be a sort of mobile game? Is it going to be in a computer? Is it going to be a video games console? Whatever. Generally, oh, here we go. Expected age rating is a sort of certificate there, and you can see details of that. When I was young, yeah, I'll just sort of say this. When I was young, and the B word, and I'm not talking about the illegitimate child word, was mentioned in a movie. I'm actually talking about the female version of a dog, a bitch, bitch. If the word bitch was mentioned in a movie, it was instantly a 15. Anything with any sort of sex, nudity, whatever, was instantly an 18. Nowadays, it's far sort of more lenient than that in terms of adult themes. So there were only ever a few 18s when I was a nipper, Basic Instinct being one of them. Okay, so gameplay, typical gameplay example. Write a few pages of narrative describing a typical 5 or 10 minute section of the game, perhaps. This is only from this template point of view. Game modes, what kind of modes do you actually have? What you actually have to do to unlock them? What about game mechanics? We'll have a lecture in game mechanics that I'm sure you'll enjoy because I'll prepare quite a lot on that. AI description as well. What do the objects actually sort of do? Characters, cars, whatever. Difficulty systems. When I was sort of young, there was only sort of one difficulty system. It was easy, medium, or hard. And then they decided to really go off the ropes with that, and it was very easy, very easy, very hard, very hard, they sort of tried to make it so that the game was a little bit more balanced now. People don't necessarily like sort of difficulty levels. It's sort of opinion is divided on the subject, where some people quite like the idea of having a sort of difficulty if they prefer it sort of easy, but some people just like the challenge, and that's sort of it, and they want to be hit with the sort of full game. Permadeath is probably a little bit too extreme, totalitarian, but never mind. So difficulty systems, think about that. Controls on all platforms. How does it sort of transpire onto another platform? Street Fighter 2 was an interesting sort of game because I thought it sort of manifested itself pretty well on the Super Nintendo. But when it moved to the Mega Drive, you're almost missing a button, and it was really rather clunky. At least I thought. So think about the controls on all platforms. Camera descriptions, you get an interface, graphical user interface. What about the audio, the music? Is it going to be a multiplayer online? What about the saving and loading system? That sort of thing. I'm just going through these things quickly because quite frankly, we're running out of time. And secondly, it's not really the level of detail that we sort of want. So backstory, you can write a description of the backstory, the storyline, as we sort of discussed, the story is really a higher level of abstraction or a brief sort of description of everything. The narrative is really what sort of gives the detail of all of this. What are your missions? What about the game geography? Where is it sort of set? Key character descriptions, what about that? What about key vehicles? That seems to be I don't know if it's a Batmobile or whatever, but it sort of looks like it. Sometimes they do sort of expect you to come up with project issues and risks. I'm not really a big sort of fan of that. There was a sort of lecture that previously ran this module, and it was a case of, what happens if someone of the team, drops out, or, you're unable to complete it or whatever. Well, it's only a university coursework, calm down. But you would have to possibly do a sort of risk assessment in some of these things, perhaps. Licenses, product placement, intellectual property, the team, what about a schedule overview in terms of design, implementation, testing, evaluation, development, all that sort of thing. How big would the development team sort of be? Do you have enough designers, level designers for the project? What middleware will be used? Is there going to be any sort of introduction of new technology? Now, this is obviously sort of antiquated before VR and AR really sort of came about. So obviously new technology is another sort of thing. Mobile devices weren't as ubiquitous either, but it is a relatively sort of detailed, I'm just drawing for the sake of it, relatively detailed template there, okay? Key design risks. Summarize the game's design document, so you can have a little summary at the end if you sort of like, but don't necessarily sort of repeat it. Now, one thing that is quite interesting from this little paragraph here is leave the reader excited and desperate to play the game. Wow, that's something to you know give it a bash and see how that sort of works. And it's a different sort of form of writing to sort of leave someone excited, you know, and more or less sort of salivating to play your game. It takes a little bit of enthusiasm. Give it a try and see how it goes in your games design document if you so desire. So, general guidelines. Make sure that you proofread the document. Not like I haven't proofread my ALA site today because I was pushed for time. But make sure that you proofread the document. It's Microsoft Word nowadays. It underlines spelling mistakes and things like that. So make sure that everything is sort of correct in terms of punctuation, spelling, and grammar. Make sure that images are justified and neat. Don't necessarily sort of have to be. Make sure that they're placed, or they look as if they're placed with purpose. Doesn't matter if you go over the word count. However, it does matter if you go drastically under the word count. Now, remember that you may be thinking to yourself, 2,000 words, that's a lot. For me, it's not a tremendous amount. Or 1,000 words, not really. But what sort of happens is if you get someone that actually does 1,000 words or 2,000 words, depending on the option, and then someone doesn't do as much as that and maybe does 600 words, obviously they shouldn't get the same sort of mark. So make sure that you actually sort of bring the word count up. Not necessarily important in this module, but in future modules it will be relatively important. You do get academics in certain schools that won't actually even read a dissertation unless it's within a particular sort of word count range. The School of Education are particularly sort of stringent about that. So they'll say, do a master's dissertation that's 10,000 to 13,000 words. And if it's out with those boundaries, they'll fling it back at you and say, it's not detailed enough or it's not concise enough. So make sure the text is justified and neat. And there's all the references. And that's really it. Does anyone have any questions? Anyone? No. Was that all clear? I suppose it was a phenomenal amount of detail. You've got the template there. Everything's fine, I think. What I can do for next week is I can look out some very good games design documents. So think about what game you're actually sort of wanting to develop for your games design document, and that's fine. And next week, what I'll do is I'll try and find. I think that it's possibly best that you do. I've had this sort of thing before. If you're working in a group, it should really be 2,000 words each. If you're doing it's that amount of sort of effort. So yes, I would say that it's 2,000 words each. Yeah. Because I suppose that with both of you working together, you should be able to sort of come up with a game of reasonable complexity. Maybe an idea to think about it is if you have 3 levels, maybe make it 6 levels. Really depends on the nature. Okay. We'll sort of cross that bridge when we come to it. I have had people sort of put in documents and not really tell me what group they're in, and then all of a sudden we were working together, you know, when you're about to sort of fail someone. So I'm not really too entirely sort of stringent with that sort of thing. But yes, it really should be the same equitable amount of effort, if that makes sense. Yeah. Any other questions? No. No, the groups are not predetermined. No, it's only a slight option. Feel free to do this individually if you wish. And if you're wanting to work in a group with another person in order to sort of take the load off, or you know, get to know someone else in the class, fair enough. I haven't decided that yet. I'm about to sort of, well, what I do after this lecture and sort of before the next is I put up the assessment. So the assessment outlines exactly when things should be handed in. But don't worry, it'll be sometime in December. Or everything. Or January. Okay. And I'll contemplate that. I mean, if you're in a group of two, really it's to try and get computer animation people to work with the computer games people. And that would be quite nice. I fear it may be a fantasy perhaps, because are you having an easy time meeting each other? I think I saw a group of, I'll stop the recording now. I think I saw a group of